Hello everyone. Tonight we descend into the silence of a human colony world. A place where fields of grain still wave under pale suns, and children still laugh in narrow streets, at least for now. Beneath the soil, something shifts. Ancient machinery grinding after a sleep longer than your species has walked upright. You probably won't survive this so. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here, and if you're feeling bold. Post your location and local time in the comments. It's always good to know where the doomed listeners are tuning in from. And so the wheel of fate turns again. Sacrifice has been made. The first key has turned. And mankind takes one step closer to the light of the throne. This is not the end. This is only the beginning. The colony looks ordinary from orbit. Blocks rise in neat rows, smoke drifts from manufacturers, and orbital relays blink with Imperial signals to you. It seems calm, almost dull, yet tremors ripple through the ground. So slight that most settlers blame faulty seismographs. Only the miners working the deeper shafts notice how the rock feels hollow. Lore masters still debate whether such tremors are warnings or inevitabilities, signs of the tomb world beneath pushing against time itself. Records from other awakenings suggest the Necrons stir in patterns, though no one agrees why some worlds wake earlier than others. For the settlers, life carries on. You go to the market, hear the voxcasters complaining about tides, maybe even joke with the Arbites about contraband amasic. But underground, a tomb complex hums with power. Dim green light sparks where it should not exist. Vault doors begin to unlock, each one older than the Imperium itself. At first, only animals react. Herds refuse to graze certain fields. Pack beasts howl at nothing. A few children speak of tall shadows at the edge of the hills, statues that weren't there yesterday. Settlers dismiss it. Superstition travels faster than truth in any colony. Still, administratum scribes quietly file reports. They write of machinery, failures, power flickers, mining carts vanishing into collapsed tunnels. None of it feels connected until you step into one of those shafts yourself and feel the cold. Not the chill of stone, but the absence of life. Historians still argue whether the Imperium ever had warning signs standardized for Necron presence. Some claim archives from the Great Crusade listed exact readings of radiation, gravity anomalies, and time distortion. Others argue these were long destroyed or intentionally suppressed, because widespread knowledge of the Necrons would cause panic across the segment. Meanwhile, you notice something else. The settlers stop singing. Whole districts once full of working songs fall quiet, as though voices themselves retreat from the air. Priests call it a crisis of faith. But the truth is simpler. The people can feel something vast watching them. One quirky fact: many early encounters with dormant Necron tombs were misattributed to haunted or cursed mines. Some rogue traders even marketed relics dug from these places as charms. Imagine buying a necklace that once hung from the armor of a Necron warrior. Probably explains why those traders had short careers. The first week of tremors is survivable. By the second, cracks begin to run through entire block foundations. Surveyors blame groundwater shifts. But the cracks spread in straight lines, as if cut with precision. Someone whispers the phrase map lines, and soon people notice the fissures connect to form circles kilometers wide. Circles enclosing whole districts. You walk across one of these cracks, not thinking much of it. But when night falls, you wake to the sound of stone grinding. Entire slabs of earth lower themselves by centimeters, settling into perfect symmetry. It is then you understand. The world itself is no longer your own. Not all awakenings are instant. Sometimes tombs take months, even years, to reach full power. But even in these early hours, the colony's fate is sealed. You could signal for help. You could send astropathic cries across the warp. But whether the Imperium listens or arrives in time is another question entirely. You pass by the Ecclesiarch Chapel, and the priest tells you this is just a test of faith. You want to believe him, but the hymn candles flicker as though smothered by invisible hands. Across the colony, the same is happening. Lights fail, crops wither. Air itself feels thin. The world still turns. Shuttles still rise from the pads, carrying goods to orbit. But the ground continues to whisper. Somewhere below, something is counting the heartbeats of every living creature above. And when the tally is done, the awakening will begin in earnest. You wake to another tremor. Cups fall from shelves. A child cries in the next hab. The air feels heavier than yesterday. No alarms sound. No official warning comes. The administratum issues only a notice about minor geological disturbances. You know better. Something under the soil moves, and every heartbeat above is nothing more than background noise to it. The settlers carry on as if normal. They head to the fields, to the manufacturers, to the mines. That is what people do. Pretend stability exists, even when the walls crack. But whispers spread. You hear them at the market stalls, muttered behind closed doors. Words like shadows, ghosts, machines. The Arbites dismiss them, though their own patrols seem shorter now. Lore masters still debate whether the first stage of a Necron awakening is natural consequence or design. Do the tombs stir randomly, or do they sense the presence of human life above and deliberately disrupt it? No one agrees, but the pattern repeats. Power shortages, tunnel collapses, animals going mad. Always the same sequence, always ending the same way. In the deep shafts, miners complain of tools corroding faster than they should. Metal turns brittle. Batteries drain in hours. A shift reports hearing a hum that vibrates in their teeth. But our specs scanners record nothing. Soon, whole crews go missing. At first, you assume cave-ins buried them. Then you notice no rubble covers their gear. They simply vanish, leaving tools scattered on smooth stone. Above ground, the weather changes. Clouds hang lower, charged with static. Lightning storms appear without rain. Vox signals flicker with bursts of static that resemble speech, but repeat in patterns too precise for natural interference. Tech adepts dismiss it as background noise, though some record the bursts obsessively, claiming the patterns repeat every 91 seconds. Historians still argue where the settlers on these doomed worlds knew the truth earlier than official reports admit. Some records suggest entire villages tried to flee before any Necron appeared, abandoning crops and homes. Others suggest they stayed, believing Imperial reinforcements inevitable. The archives rarely say what happened to those villages. By the third week, you see it yourself. Patrols vanish. Hablock basements open into gaps not on any chart. And the strangest part, none of it feels accidental. The disruptions follow geometry. Whole neighborhoods lie within patterns like spokes of a wheel. Their power failures timed to cascade outward from a central point. One odd trivia. The Imperium once labeled these awakenings a Xeno's pattern. Pharaoh construct phasing in some outdated tactical manual. The bureaucratic language fooled no one, but the name stuck in a few PDF regiments. Even now, veterans sometimes whisper about phasers instead of Necrons, as if a new name makes the old fear easier to carry. The Arbites make a show of control. They post notices, set curfews, rest a few loudmouths. But their patrols thin out. Too, you see their vehicles parked and empty. Lights still running. No officers nearby. When you ask questions, the answers change every time. Reassignment, redeployment, quarantine. Never the truth. You notice other patterns. Livestock herded into barns are found. Dead, their flesh drained as if by fire but with no burns, entire fields of grain wilt in hours, the stalks collapsing into ash that leaves no soot on your hands. The priests say it is divine punishment, the adepts say it is chemical contamination. You know it is neither. Neighbors talk of statues again. At first, only in jest. Then, with fear, they say they see tall shapes at the ridge. Always in the corner of the eye, some claim to have touched them, only to feel cold metal where rock should be. The next day, the statues are gone. Lore masters still debate whether these shapes are scouting constructs or simply projections of Necron will. Some argue they are fragments of Canoptech units, automated guardians testing the surface. Others think the settlers hallucinate under stress. Both explanations feel thin once you see one yourself. One evening, you stand outside and watch the stars. For a moment, you imagine a ship could still take you away. Then the ground shifts beneath. You again, gentle but steady. Windows rattle. Dust falls from ceilings, and somewhere far below, you feel the unmistakable impression of a door sliding open. Not stone collapsing, not rock. Splitting an engineered door unlocking. You realize then that the whispers in the earth are not warnings, they're announcements. Something beneath has decided that the time has come. And you are already inside its design. The miners are the first to vanish in large numbers. One shift goes down with 30 men. Only 3 come back, and they do not speak. Their faces are grey, eyes vacant, uniforms covered in dust that does not wash away. They sit in the Medicaid ward until the commissar orders their execution for suspected heresy. No one protests. The mine entrance is close. Soon after, not with cave-ins, but with smooth, seamless walls of black stone that no tool cuts through, entire industries grind to a halt overnight. Administratum clerks blame sabotage, even muttering about rebel elements. But you have seen the cracks, the patterns, the impossible walls. This is no rebellion. This is construction. Then, the first Necron warriors rise. It happens at dusk. A patrol near the outskirts sends Novox hours later. A runner stumbles into the capital, bleeding and half burned. He speaks only one word, metal. You follow him into the Medicaid before he dies, skin peeled back in precise strips, as though energy itself had sliced him apart. Lore masters still debate whether Necron warriors awaken haphazardly or in deliberate waves. Some records describe small bands surfacing at first, their movements clumsy as systems reboot. Others suggest entire battalions rise together, already locked in perfect formation. Here, the first glimpses are scattered, 2, then 4, then dozens moving with steady, machine-like rhythm. You hear the reports, skeletal figures, taller than men, with eyes burning green. Their weapons hum with light that reduces flesh to nothing, stripping muscle from bone in a single sweep. Witnesses say the sound of those guns is worse than the deaths themselves, a dry hiss-like. Air being sucked out of lungs. Historians still argue whether the first settlers fought bravely or simply fled. Some records describe firefights lasting hours, barricades holding back the metal tide. Others claim entire towns emptied without resistance. Both versions might be true. Depending on where you stood when the Necrons came, you see it with your own eyes 2 nights later. A manufacturing district loses power. Families step into the streets, carrying lamps. Then the lamps fail. 2, in the silence. You hear the measured rhythm of heavy feet. Shadows stretch longer than they should. Then green light cuts across the dark, and people vanish into dust. The PDF responds at last, rushing squads with lascans and flak armor into the district. You hear their volleys crack. Through the night, for a moment, it feels like hope. But then the light enters. Green beams cut lines through walls, vehicles and men alike. When you creep close enough to see, the squad is gone. No blood, no bodies, only weapons, and arms scattered in neat piles. as if the flesh had been erased. One quirky fact: the first Imperial commanders to face Gauss weaponry thought it was disintegration. Technology. Later studies revealed it is worse. Gauss fire does not vaporize. It strips matter layer by layer, atom by atom, until nothing remains but ash. The effect is slow enough to be felt, fast enough to leave no survivors. The administratum orders an official lockdown. Curfews are set, though they mean little when entire neighborhoods vanish before nightfall. You hear preachers shout of demons, while adepts mutter of machines older than terror itself. No one agrees, but everyone hides behind sealed doors as soon as the sun sets. Lore masters still debate whether Necrons kill indiscriminately at this stage or deliberately test human defenses. On some worlds, they seem to slaughter at random, leaving only silence behind. On others, they strike specific targets. Power relays, comms hubs, defense garrisons on your world. Both patterns merge, civilians vanish, patrols vanish, and power grids die with surgical precision. One evening, you pass by the riverfront and see a shape standing in the shallows, tall, skeletal, its metal ribs glowing faintly green. It does not move. You freeze, expecting it to attack. Instead, it turns its head with inhuman slowness, watches you, and sinks into the water without a sound. The ripples fade, and the river looks normal again. You never return to that river. The commissar orders executions for panic mongers, but fear spreads faster than his bullets. Hablocks empty. Families flee into the hills. Some even attempt to stow away on orbital shuttles. The Arbites shoot many of them, claiming duty to maintain order. Meanwhile, more patrols vanish into the dark. By now, you understand the pattern. The whispers in the earth were the warning, the vanishings the herald, and the warriors the reality. The colony still breathes, still tries to live, but every hour more of it falls silent. The Necrons have risen, and they do not tire. They do not falter. They do not speak. Only the grinding of their weapons and the silence of their steps mark their presence, and both are now everywhere. Voices begin to circulate in hushed tones, stories that stretch back further than memory. Old settlers, those who came before the administratums, tithes and paperwork, swear their grandparents stole them never to mine the hills. The stone guardians rest there. One farmer says as he boards up his hab door. He doesn't even look you in the eye. He just repeats the phrase, stone guardians. Lore masters still debate whether such folk tales are coincidence or fragments of forgotten imperial records. Some claim that ancient settlers carried subconscious memories of earlier encounters, stories passed down in distorted forms. Others argue that the warp itself imprints warnings into human minds, shaping dreams into myths. Whatever the truth, you hear these whispers now, and they match what you have already seen. Historians still argue whether the Imperium deliberately erased knowledge of the Necrons after the Great Crusade. Certain archives suggest that worlds purged by the legions of the Emperor bore signs of the same green lights, the same skeletal figures, yet the official records mark those campaigns simply as xenosuppression. To you, sitting in the dark with only a guttering lamp, the semantics hardly matter. You walk through the marketplace, what remains of it. Many stalls are empty, abandoned by merchants who vanished in the night. A few remain, selling food at absurd prices. They all talk of statues, not just one or two this time, but dozens in fields, on rooftops, beside shrines. Some settlers claim they move, others swear they only appear where no light shines. You look for yourself and see nothing, yet the hair on your arms rises all the same. One odd trivia: the earliest rogue traders to encounter Necron tombs often mistook them for abandoned human ruins. Their logs describe geometric catacombs of remarkable precision and statues of skeletal kings. Many of these traders never returned. Their ships found drifting, stripped clean as if eaten by light. Some modern collectors still boast of owning trinkets from these expeditions, though most of those trinkets are harmless scrap. The Arbites dismiss the tales as hysteria. They say fear breeds visions, and men see what they expect. But their own precinct house grows quieter. Each day, you notice patrols shrinking, Vox signals cutting off mid-sentence. Even the loudspeakers in the squares begin to fail. Their announcements breaking into static. The city feels as though it is being smothered, sound itself pulled into the earth. Lore masters still debate whether Necron awakening exerts a psychic weight or simply technological interference. Some describe it as the silence field, a damping of life that drains voices and thought alike. Others argue it is coincidence, that humans project fear onto empty air, but you feel it, the pressure behind your eyes. A heaviness in every word dot in the outer settlements. Shrines to the Emperor burn brighter than ever. Priests lead processions, chanting litanies, holding relics aloft. Yet more and more of their congregations vanish overnight. The priests continue to march, though their voices crack with exhaustion. You watch them pass, banners sagging, incense failing to mask the smell of ash drifting from the hills. One night, a new rumor spreads. Children in the hablocks say they hear voices in their dreams, mechanical whispers promising safety if they walk to the hills. Some families find their sons and daughters gone by morning, doors unbroken, locks untouched. The authorities call it kidnapping. You know better. The administratum continues to release reports. They call for calm, for a measured response, for obedience to curfew. But even their scribes begin to falter. Pages of official notices arrive smeared with ink, filled with repeated phrases as if the clerk's hands moved. Without thought, the guardians wait. The guardians wait. The guardians wait. Entire paragraphs reduced to that single sentence. Historians still argue whether such mass hysteria is purely human or influenced by Necron presence. Some suggest the tombs emit fields that disrupt memory and concentration. Others dismiss it as panic in the face of collapse. For you, there is no question. Something is whispering into minds, bending wills, shaping words. You walk the streets and notice doors nailed shut. Windows bricked over, entire blocks sealed against an enemy that does not knock. In the distance, green light flickers on the horizon. At first, you think it is some atmospheric phenomenon. Then you hear the rhythm of footsteps, metallic, precise, and you know. The guardians of legend walk again. And the whispers of the past were not warnings, they were promises. The city still clings to life, but already it feels as though you live in ruins. The administratum tries to act as if control still exists. Notices are posted on cracked walls, sealed with the aquila, declaring that all disturbances are geological and under review. You almost laugh when you read them because whole districts are missing, and paper seals do not fill the void. Adept scribes whisper among themselves. Their records show orbital tideship. Departures delayed. Astropathic relays silent. Even the courier shuttles carrying reports back to Segmentum Command vanish into static once they leave orbit. The chain of communication, the lifeline of Imperial authority, is breaking, thread by thread. Lore masters still debate whether such breakdowns are caused by Necron interference or human incompetence. Some argue the Necrons deliberately jam Vox and warp channels, using technologies no one in the Imperium fully understands. Others suggest administratum panic leads to clerical paralysis, with messages never sent. In truth, you see both. Systems flicker with technical faults, while officials drown in indecision. Then there is the commissar, a lone figure with a polished, bold pistol, striding through the hablocks with sermons of discipline and loyalty. He shoots deserters without hesitation, lines up frightened families, and orders obedience at gunpoint. For a while, people comply. But when an entire Arbite's patrol disappears, mid-curfew, even his pistol cannot command faith. Historians still argue whether commissars on doomed worlds maintained order or only worsened chaos. Some claim they kept regiments intact for weeks. Longer, others accuse them of killing more humans than the Necrons themselves. Watching this one bark orders over empty streets, you suspect both accounts are true. The Adeptus Arbeit's attempt too. In force martial law, they broadcast recordings of the Lex Imperialis, their voices monotone, their faces grim, but their precinct grows quieter each night. Vehicles sit abandoned in the motor pool. Sirens still wailing without operators. The Voxnet crackles with automated messages on endless loop. Like prayers left unanswered. One quirky fact: Arbeit's manuals once contained contingency codes for archeo threats. If invoked, entire populations could be lawfully abandoned, tithe obligations suspended, and defenses redirected. Most of these codes were struck from official records. Millennia ago, no one wanted settlers to know how often ancient tombs swallowed whole colonies. Tech-ADEPTS attempt analysis. They gather our specs readings, compare tremor maps, argue in data count. Some believe they stand on the verge of a grand revelation, a pattern that might predict the next collapse. Others argue for a purging all records and fleeing at once. Their debates turn violent. Megadendrites clashing in the dark. You hear gunfire echo from their quarter one night, and by dawn half their halls burn. Lore masters still debate whether the Mechanicus knew more about the Necrons than they admit. Fragments of STC data, half-erased inscriptions, and forbidden archives suggest knowledge existed long before the Imperium rose. Yet officially, the Necrons remain unknown to you. Watching red-robed adepts squabble while streets fall silent, the denial feels deliberate. The ecclesiarchy responds differently. Priests march into the squares with relics raised high. Demanding citizens kneel and sing louder than their fear. Some obey, some mock them. The priest's zeal grows until they demand sacrifices burning grain, tearing down manufacturing pots to build. Pyres, faith clashes with hunger, and riots follow. You see it yourself. A priest drags a youth to the altar, declaring his life a tithe to the throne. The boy's family resists. Fists fly. And in the chaos the priest's torch sets a hab ablaze. Flames roar into the night as the priest screams of heresy. By morning, 50 families have fled the quarter, seeking shelter in the hills. Already crawling with shadows, historians still argue whether such zeal ever slowed Necron advance. Some sermons may have stiffened resolve. Others surely doomed entire districts. The record books are merciless in their ambiguity. Meanwhile, tremors worsen, streets split in symmetrical lines, drains pour green light instead of water, and walls sprout cliffs no human hand carved. Officials debate reports in endless meetings, stamping papers while the world round them shifts. You stand in the square one evening and realize no one truly commands this planet anymore. Orders are shouted, yes, but power no longer flows. Administratum scribes hide behind stacks of parchment. The Arbeits vanish into the dark. Priests scream louder than their dwindling flocks. And the commissar shoots one more deserter, his pistol echoing through empty streets. The chain of authority has fractured. Fear has replaced obedience, and through the cracks, the Necrons rise. Without resistance, the skies grow strange. You step outside at dawn and see the horizon flickering with pale green arcs. Lightning without clouds. Birds no longer fly. Orbital traffic ceases. Though the Administratum insists shuttles still depart on schedule. You look up, and there is nothing, no contrails. No shuttle glow. Just the blank emptiness of sky. Lore masters still debate whether Necron interference in orbit is deliberate suppression or an automatic defense system. Some records describe ships struck from the void by beams rising straight from the ground, while others speak of comms blackout so complete that fleets passed entire systems without detecting life. You only know that one day you saw blinking relay satellites above, and the next you did not. Historians still argue whether our specs operators on doomed worlds falsified their logs or simply could not interpret what they saw. Reports speak of geometric anomalies spreading beneath the crust. Entire cities of metal blossoming where no human eyes could see. The descriptions vary, some compare them to gears, others to veins, but all agree. The planet itself changes shape. You hear the whispers from the orbital station. They say a cargo hauler tried to flee, engines burning bright, only to vanish mid-ascent. Not explode, vanish. A moment of light. Then nothing. No wreckage. No debris, only silence. The Vox repeats static for hours after. A single metallic tone that makes your teeth ache. One quirky fact. In the earliest Imperial contacts with Necrons, our specs crews described their readings as negative mass, entire structures registered as voids, absences of matter. Even when sensors showed solid surfaces, some tech adepts still debate whether Necron architecture exists fully in real space, or only partially bleeds into it. Watching black pylons rise from the hills, you suspect the latter. The local void ships remain in low orbit, waiting for clearance. Days pass without word. You hear rumors that one tried to send a mayday through astropathic channels, only for the choir to scream in unison. Their bodies left charred on their thrones. After that, captains fall silent, their whole lights dim. Looking up at night, you swear the stars themselves flicker. Lore masters still debate whether Necron signal jamming is technological or psychic in nature. Some describe it as a disruption of electromagnetic spectra. Others claim it is a resonance field that drowns thought itself. You stand on the hab roof one evening and hear the voxed static whispering, repeating syllables in rhythm. They are not words, not in any language you know, but they carry intent. Meanwhile, surface structures warp, roads collapse, not randomly, but into patterns. Stone tiles align into circles, metal railings bend into arcs. It feels less like decay and more like design. Entire blocks crumble in unison, leaving behind perfect angles, as if the world is remaking itself according to a plan. Historians still argue whether the Imperium ever successfully stopped such transformations. There are rare cases where bombardment glassed entire continents before the process completed. Yet, even in those accounts, survivors reported the green glow beneath the glass tombs still alive, waiting. You wonder if orbit above your own world ever had such an option, or if your commanders already failed you. The Arbeits order citizens to stay indoors. The Commissar executes more deserters, priests shout of judgment. But none of their words matter when the sky itself groans. A black monolith pierces the clouds, rising not from the earth but sliding upward, as if it had always been there. Its surface gleams without reflection, absorbing light. For hours, it stands silent. Then it hums, low and steady, making every window vibrate. One night, you hear screams near the shuttle port. By the time you arrive, the landing pads are empty. Families who had camped there for days are gone. Their tents scattered, belongings left behind. The administratum claims they were relocated. You walk across the pad and see only faint green. Scorch marks, burned into perfect hexagons. Lore masters still debate whether these early surface structures serve military function or ritual purpose. Are they weapons, or simply the tombs expanding their domain? Adepts argue endlessly, sketching diagrams, overlaying maps. But you need no diagram to know the truth. The world itself is no longer yours. The sky is no longer yours, and orbit, once a path of escape, has become another prison. You look upward one final time, searching for the glow of Imperial reinforcements. You see nothing, only cold stars, and beneath them, the silent shadow of a ship that no longer answers any hails. You wake to the sound of gunfire, not the sharp crack of lascans, but the thunder of heavy weapons. The PDF has mobilized at last. Columns of armored carriers roll down the avenues, banners of the Aquila still painted proudly on their hulls. Men march in formation, their boots pounding rhythm against the stone. For a moment, you believe the Imperium fights back. Then you see what they are fighting. From the hills march Necron immortals, taller, heavier, their frames clad in darker metal than the skeletal warriors you saw. Before, their weapons are not the slim rifles of scouts, but broad cannons, each one glowing with energy that hisses through the air. They fire, and an entire armored column disintegrates before your eyes, tanks collapsing into rust and dust in seconds. Lore masters still debate whether immortals were once leaders of Necron legions or simply specialized constricts. Some records claim they are warriors who fought in life and were given stronger shells in death. Others argue they are purpose-built machines, devoid of any history. Whatever the truth, their presence marks escalation. This is no scattered awakening. This is war. The PDF open fire, Lascan volleys lancing into the greenlit dark. You hear sergeants shouting prayers, commissars bellowing discipline. The air fills with the crackle of energy, the roar of engines, the stench of ozone. For hours, the battle rages across the plain outside the capital. You climb a ruined wall and watch the lines collide. Historians still argue whether Imperial lass weapons ever had any effect on Necron constructs. Some after-action reports insist volleys slowed them, even dropped a few. Others record no impact at all. Beams dispersing across necrodermis without mark from where you stand. It looks like both are true. Some Necrons fall, shattered by sheer volume of fire, but most march forward unharmed. Their advance relentless. You see one tank score a hit. Its shell punches into an immortal's chest, tearing half its body away. For a moment, the machine collapses. Soldiers cheer, firing harder. Then the green glow intensifies. Metal flows like liquid, sealing wounds, rebuilding limbs. Within seconds, the immortal rises again. Weapon already glowing, the cheering stops. One quirky fact. Imperial tacticians sometimes call this the resurrection protocol, though they have no idea how it works. Some Mechanicus adepts believe Necron bodies are filled with self-repairing nanites. Others insist the warriors are simply phase-shifted, momentarily leaving real space before reappearing intact. Whatever the explanation, the result is the same: your enemies do not stay dead. The PDF begin to break. Men flee their lines. Commissars execute them. Officers scream into dead voxlinks. The immortals continue to advance. Their formation perfect, their pace unhurried. They do not sprint. They do not hesitate. They simply walk forward, and everything in their path crumbles. Lore masters still debate whether the Necrons fight for extermination or conquest. Some worlds report total annihilation, every living thing erased. Others are stripped of defenses and infrastructure, but survivors remain, left to starve. Perhaps the immortals do not care which. Fate unfolds. Perhaps their orders come from something deeper. Night falls, though you hardly notice. The sky glows green with Gauss fire. Whole regiments vanish in streaks of light. Their screams echoing only for seconds before silence reclaims the plain. The city's walls tremble under the bombardment. Refugees pour into the streets, clutching children, dragging carts. The ecclesiarchy rings bells, their sound lost under the hum of weapons. Historians still argue whether humanity's faith offers protection in such moments. Priests swear relics glowed. Hymns shielded the faithful. Survivors just remember the silence, the endless march, and the sudden absence of everyone they loved. You find yourself caught between both accounts as you press against a wall, watching an immortal's green eyes sweep the crowd. The PDF retreat into the city, their vehicles burning behind them. The immortals follow, their heavy footsteps echoing through empty streets. Every shot fired, every barricade built, delays them only minutes. You watch men fight bravely, desperately, only to vanish under beams of green fire. One soldier beside you mutters, "A prayer, clutching the locket to his chest. He never finishes the words. A beam strikes him, and he collapses into ash. The locket falls into your hand. You keep it, though you know it offers no protection. The march continues. The immortals advance without haste, without pause, without mercy. And you realize this is not a battle. It is an erasure. From the ruins of the hills rises a figure, taller than the rest. Metal gleams in patterns too deliberate for a chance, its armor etched with glyphs that burn faintly green. It carries a staff, more like a symbol than a weapon. Yet every immortal halts when it raises the rod. The air itself feels heavier. An Necron lord has awakened. Lore masters still debate whether such lords retain the minds of their ancient selves or operate as constructs bound by programming. Some argue they are nobles from the Necron dynasties, their personalities uploaded into eternal shells. Others claim they are nothing more than hierarchs of code, illusions of command. But you see how the warriors move when it gestures. This is authority. Historians still argue whether the rise of a Necron lord marks a shift from random killing to calculated conquest. Records from other worlds suggest the pattern. Once a lord appears, Necron legions stop wandering aimlessly. They form ranks, strike in sequence, dismantle defenses, systematically. Here, that moment has come. The immortals regroup, no longer scattered through the streets. They fall into perfect formation, their advance now disciplined rather than relentless. You watch as squads of warriors sweep alleys in silence, clearing survivors with surgical precision. Entire PDF companies are pinned, cut off, and erased within minutes. The chaos of the last days crystallizes into something worse: organized extermination. One quirky fact: some Imperial savants once claimed the glyphs on Necron lords' armor shift constantly, like data streams running across stone. A few even believe they could decode meaning from them names, dynasties, orders. Every one of those savants died mysteriously. Their research purged from archives. The Mechanicus called the glyphs blasphemous code. But you watch them glow and suspect they are names, each one older than terror itself. The Lord does not rush. It walks slowly, surveying the city like a landlord returning to his property, its ice-scanned buildings, bridges, shrines, as if assessing their worth. When it raises its staff, a building collapses, not from impact but from within, walls folding inward into neat piles of rubble. The message is clear. This is reclamation. Lore masters still debate whether Necron lords feel emotion. Some accounts describe them as cold as machines. Others hint at arrogance, even disdain. When they confront human leaders, you cannot decide. Watching it stand on the capital's causeway, gazing down at terrified crowds, you sense neither hate nor pity, only inevitability. The commissar tries to rally the defenders. He orders heavy weapons into position, commands the PDF to focus fire on the towering figure. For a heartbeat, you hope plasma guns roar, missiles streak, lascanons thrum. The blasts hit squarely, tearing chunks of metal and stone from its body. Smoke billows, men cheer. Then the smoke clears. The Lord still stands, its wounds already knitting. With liquid green light, it raises its staff once more. A beam arcs across the barricades, slicing through men, weapons, and vehicles alike. Silence follows, broken only by the sound of boots. Fleeing, the commissar dies with his bold pistol still raised. Historians still argue whether the death of command structures mattered once the Lord rose. Some believe a disciplined human defense could hold longer, even cripple Necron forces. Others point out that entire Space Marine chapters struggled to hold similar awakenings for a world like yours, with only PDF and scattered arbits. The argument is academic. The ecclesiarchy refuses to yield. Priests line the cathedral steps, chanting litanies, holding relics against the dock. For a moment, the hymns echo louder than the hum of Weapons, some in the crowd fall to their knees, desperate for salvation. The Lord watches, silent. Then the immortals fire in unison. The cathedral vanishes in a wash of green light, its spire collapsing into dust. The hymns end mid-note. One survivor beside you whispers that the Emperor has abandoned the planet. Another insists this is merely a test of faith. You realize both may be wrong. This is not punishment. Not test only a cycle older than your entire species. The Necrons rise. The living fall. The Lord raises its staff once more, and this time the entire city seems to obey. Lights fail. Vox relays die. Streets shudder as cracks spread in precise lines. You stumble, clutching the wall, realizing that even the stone beneath you bends to its will. This is no mere commander. This is the voice of the tomb itself. The age of random slaughter ends. The age of conquest begins. The city dies in a single night. Not in fire, not in riot, but in silence. You wake to darkness, not the usual blackout that follows a tremor, but absolute absence. No glow from the manufactorums, no vox chatter on the air, not even the hum of generators. Only the sound of footsteps. Lore masters still debate whether the Necrons extinguish cities to demoralize survivors or simply to erase evidence of human occupation. Either way, you see the effect. People wander in confusion, candles in hand, trying to call loved ones across dead vox links. Their voices echo too clearly, carrying across streets that feel abandoned already. Historians still argue whether the fall of a capital marks the true end of resistance on a world. Some records suggest human enclaves fight on furriers in the wilderness. Others show mass surrender once central. Authority collapses. In your case, the fall feels instant. With no vox, no lights, no command. The city is no longer a city. It is a grave. You step into the avenue and find it empty. Not deserted, emptied. Whole crowds that had huddled in the squares yesterday are gone. No bodies, no wreckage, just belongings scattered on the ground. A child's doll, a half-eaten ration pack, a lascan with its power cell still humming, as if everyone simply stopped existing. One quirky fact. Some scholars once claimed Necrons harvest populations for energy or experimentation, rather than kill outright. The Mechanicus has never confirmed it, though the lack of bodies on so many tomb worlds fuels the suspicion. You look at the abandoned streets and wonder where everyone has gone. The immortals march through the avenues now. You hear their steps echo long before you see them. When they pass, they do not hurry. They turn corners with mechanical precision, their formation perfect even when there is no enemy to fight. Occasionally one stops, raises its weapon, and a hablock collapses in silence. Then it continues forward, as if crossing names from a list. Lore masters still debate whether Necron advances follow tactical logic or ritual design. To your eyes, it looks like both. They strike power plants, shrines, and commissariat offices first, but also level random homes, schools, and gardens. It feels like erasure for its own sake, yet methodical all the same. The priests who survived the cathedral's destruction try to rally the people, but few listen. Their sermons are hoarse, their relics broken. They march through empty streets, voices echoing off walls, but no congregation gathers. You follow them once, out of curiosity more than faith. When the immortals arrive, the priests raise their icons, screaming hymns. The Necrons do not slow. Their weapons hiss, and the priests vanish mid-verse. Only the icons remain, clattering to the stones. Historians still argue whether any god hears prayers in moments like these. You suspect the truth is simpler. Silence answers silence. In the richer districts, administratum scribes still try to work. You find them by candlelight, bent over parchment, stamping seals on documents no one will read. They whisper about evacuation ships, about requests for reinforcements, about compliance reports. When the Necrons come, the scribes keep writing until the green light washes over their desks. Peepers scatter into ash before the ink is dry. You wander further and see families hiding in basements, their candles flickering. They ask if reinforcements are coming, if the god or the Astartes will save them. You cannot answer. You know the Astropaths are silent, the sky is blind, and the city above them already belongs to something else at one night. You climb to the top of a manufacturing tower. From there, you see it all. Streets dark and hollow. Only faint green glows marking where the Immortals patrol. The palace dome lies split in half, shattered as if by a giant's hand. The Arbeits precinct is rubble. The Ecclesiarchy spire is gone. You realize you are looking at ruins already. Though the walls still stand, lore masters still debate whether humanity ever truly holds its cities against Necron. Conquest, the records are scattered, censored, contradictory. Some speak of miracles, of regiments holding against impossible odds. Others show only silence where millions once lived. Standing in the dark, listening to mechanical footsteps echo closer. You doubt the miracles. The city does not fall in fire or collapse. It falls in silence, one block at a time. One voice at a time. Until there is nothing left to hear, the city is gone. But not you. You find yourself among the ragged handful that refuses to vanish quietly. Guardsmen without commanders, priests without churches, civilians with nothing left but their breath you gather in alleys, warehouses and sewers. Every face is pale, every hand clutching either a weapon or a relic. No one trusts anyone. But you all cling to the same truth. Survival lies in resistance, however brief. Lore masters still debate whether guerrilla resistance ever slowed the Necrons. Some records describe sabotage delaying, advances, ambushes crippling patrols. Others claim such stories are propaganda. Hope written after the fact to mask despair. Yet in the tunnels beneath the ruins, you plan your strike. And hope feels as tangible as the rifle in your hands. Historians still argue whether faith or fear drove these groups. Priests claim their litanies held warriors firm. Commissariat accounts, when they survive, insist discipline alone kept men from breaking. You see neither. What binds you to the others is simpler. You have nothing left to lose. The first raid is clumsy. A squad of survivors plants explosives along a patrol route. Hoping to catch the Immortals off guard, you wait in the shadows, heart pounding. When the green eyes approach, the charge goes off. Fire tearing through the street. For a heartbeat, you believe you've succeeded. Then the smoke clears. The Immortals stand intact, only dusted with rubble. They turn, weapons glowing. The squad vanishes in light. You run before the beams sweep your way. One quirky fact. Some Imperial resistance cells believed Necrons were vulnerable to relics, blessed blades, sacred oils, even hymnals nailed to barricades. None of these worked, yet a few records hint at crude amp devices disrupting Necron weapons briefly. Of course, building such devices in the ruins of a city is another matter entirely. Despite failure, the raids continue. Survivors steal food from abandoned hubs, cut power lines to stall Necron advance, collapse tunnels behind them. Each act costs lives. Yet for a moment it feels like defiance. You join one such strike, lobbing firebombs into a patrol. The Necrons ignore the flames until one stumbles. Its frame blackened. The others stop. Watch it crumble into ash. Then march on without reaction. You realize they do not mourn. Do not hesitate. Do not even acknowledge loss. Lore masters still debate whether Necrons perceive themselves as individuals or extensions of the tomb's will. To you, the answer is obvious. Watching them advance, ignoring the dead among their number, you know they are not an army of men. They are an equation. Written in metal, the priests among you attempt rituals. They chant. They daub blood on walls. They promise miracles. Some survivors believe, clinging to hymns as though they can drown out the silence. Others mock them, yet still follow, because belief at least feels warmer than despair. One night, a priest calls down blessings on a barricade of scrap. When the Necrons arrive, the barricade collapses in seconds. The priest burns alongside it, his relic melting into slag. Historians still argue whether such sacrifices inspired courage or only wasted lives. You cannot say. All you know is that the chants echo in your ears long after the priest is gone. And for a time, you grip your rifle tighter because of them. In the sewers, arguments flare. Some demand retreat into the hills. Others press for more sabotage. If you even suggest surrender, though no one can say what surrender means to the Necrons. Fists fly, knives flash. You realize your greatest enemy is not discipline, nor even fear. It is exhaustion. People are too tired to fight, too tired to hope, too tired to keep breathing. One night, a rumor spreads. Someone has damaged a Necron construct. A squad claims to have lured a warrior into a mine shaft and buried it under rubble. Whether true or not, the story spreads, giving a flicker of hope. For a day, survivors fight harder. Ambushes grow bolder. But the next night, the Necron Lord appears on the horizon. Its staff raised, the tunnels shake. Walls crumble, and dozens are buried alive. The message is clear. You are not the only ones who adapt. Lore masters still debate whether the Necrons ever acknowledge resistance at all, or if they crush it as naturally as the tide crushes sandcastles. Standing in the sewer with dust in your lungs, you feel like the latter. You are not an enemy. You are an inconvenience, still. You fight, because doing nothing feels worse. The resistance fractures. When the red-robed adepts of the Mechanicus emerge from their enclave, their faces are half-burned, their vox voices glitching with static, yet their eyes gleam with something other than fear. They do not speak of survival. They speak of opportunity. Lore masters still debate whether the Adeptus Mechanicus sees Necron awakenings as threats or treasures. On one hand, they know the machines will erase them. On the other, their creed demands reverence for lost technology. In your tunnels, you see both urges pulling the adepts apart. Some urge retreat, holding data slates crammed with stolen readings. Others argue that studying Necron constructs is worth any cost. Historians still argue whether Mechanicus' presence dooms resistance cells. Many records show betrayal. Adepts transmitting signals, sabotaging defenses, even opening vaults to the enemy in their hunger for knowledge. Other accounts describe brilliant improvisations, Necron weapons turned against their owners on your world. Both stories come true. The Adepts show you a weapon and arc of scavenged metal, wires and power cells. They claim it can overload Necron circuitry. A handful of Guardsmen test it during an ambush, and for once the rumor proves real. One Necron warrior stutters, sparks, and collapses, its body twitching in the dirt. Hope flares like a match in the dark. One quirky fact. The Mechanicus once coined the phrase Xeno's archaeotechnic anomalies for Necron weapons. It was a safe way to admit ignorance without outright heresy. Whole treatises exist describing their surface features while avoiding the truth that these weapons outperform every tool humanity ever built. The Adepts you watch now fall into the same trap. They call their weapon reverse engineered. You know they barely understand it. But with each test, the danger grows. Necron patrols arrive faster after every strike, their movements less random. It is as if they recognize the stolen technology. Adepts argue it proves their theories Necrons react to innovation. Others warn it is suicide. Fistfights break out even here, megadendrites slashing in sparks of oil and blood. Lore masters still debate whether the Mechanicus ever truly worships the Messiah or only venerates knowledge. Watching these adepts, you realize both are the same. They kneel to the hum of machines, their prayers full of equations. When they speak of divinity, they mean circuitry. And when they look at the Necrons, their eyes burn not with hatred, but hunger. Then betrayal arrives. A strike team of survivors plans to sabotage a Necron pylon. Guided by the Adepts' readings, you march with them, weapons ready, faith thin but alive. In the ruins, the team splits. Half vanish into shadow, following one Adept deeper. The others wait. Hours pass. No signal, no explosion, only silence. When dawn comes, the Adepts return alone, robes singed but eyes wide with revelation. They claim the team was lost. You notice their packs are heavier, stuffed with components that glow faintly green. Historians still argue whether such betrayals were selfish or sanctioned. Did the Mechanicus act on personal greed, or were they following secret orders from distant Fudge worlds? The archives give no clarity. But for you, trapped in the ruins, it does not matter. The survivors are fewer, the Necrons are stronger, and the Adepts whisper to one another about discoveries too precious to destroy. One night, you see it yourself. A wounded Necron warrior lies twitching in an alley. Its body half dismantled, the Adepts surround it, chanting Binharic prayers, carving at its armor with mechadendrites. Sparks fly, glyphs shimmer. You ask if they mean to destroy it. They do not answer. Instead, they argue over who should keep the fragment. They tear free a shard of glowing crystal, humming with power. Hours later, the warrior rises again. Whole, the alley empty but fresh. Lore masters still debate whether the Omnissiah would condemn or bless such acts. Are they desecration or devotion? You do not know. All you know is that the Adepts seem less human each day. Their skin more metal, their words less comprehensible, and when the Necrons march closer, you cannot shake the suspicion that someone among the red robes guides them here. In the end, you realize the Mechanicus never stood with you. They stand with their own creed, one that values knowledge over flesh, machine over man. Perhaps they do not fear the Necrons because, in some way, they wish to become them. The ground no longer feels like earth. You walk across streets once paved with stone and find them reshaped into black glass. Blocks that once leaned crooked now stand as if cut by a single blade, their edges precise, their interiors hollow. Everywhere, structures rise that no human hand built. Obelisks of green-lit metal sprout from plazas. Pyramids push through manufacturing floors, their angles flawless, their surfaces cold enough to freeze breath. Lore masters still debate whether Necron tomb expansion is automatic or commanded. Some scholars argue it is the tomb world itself awakening, its machines unfolding according to millennia-old codes. Others insist a Necron lore directs every line, every pylon, every tower. Watching a factory collapse into neat cubes while a monolith glides above, you suspect both are true. Historians still argue whether these expansions change the very nature of reality. Witnesses describe distortions in space-time, shadows stretching wrong, distances shrinking or growing as if the streets themselves bend. Some even claim hours pass differently. Within the tomb's reach, clocks disagreeing, days shortening. You cannot prove it, but you know nights feel longer, mornings shorter, and fear constant. One quirky fact, early Mechanicus observers coined the term geomantic reformatting for this process. It was their polite way of saying the planet itself was being rebuilt, every rock and brick rearranged into Necron design. The phrase never caught on among soldiers. They preferred world-eating. You prefer silence. The survivors watch as their city becomes something else. A park where children once played now holds a black pylon humming with energy. Rivers reroute themselves, banks lined with metal spires. Whole mountains split, revealing stairways into glowing caverns. It is not simply conquest, it is replacement. The world itself becomes alien, remade to match the pattern beneath. Lore masters still debate whether these structures serve military function or ritual purpose. To the Mechanicus, they are weapons, massive conduits channeling unknown power. To priests, they are altars, mockeries of the Emperor's own cathedrals. To you, they are both. They kill and they proclaim dominion. Every new spire is both blade and banner. You remember the manufacturing district once. Its smokestacks choked the air with black plumes. Now those smokestacks are gone, replaced by towers that hum with faint green light. The survivors who scavenge nearby claim they hear whispers when they stand too close. Voices in no tongue they know. Some stagger back with nosebleeds. Others refuse to leave, standing still until Necron patrols collect them. Historians still argue whether these whispers are psychic intrusion or simple auditory hallucinations. You cannot tell. But you know this. You hear them too. In the dead of night, lying in the sewers, you hear words crawl into your dreams. They do not order. They do not plead. They simply state, "This world is ours." The priests monger. Resistance call the structures heresies. They try to lead sabotage missions, carrying promethium, chanting litanies, believing faith will protect them. None return. The few who witness their attempts say the pyres of fire burn for seconds before vanishing into silence, as if consumed by the black stone itself. One day, you creep close enough to touch a wall. It is smooth, seamless, without mark. Your reflection looks back at you, but warped, your body stretched, your face thinned, your eyes too wide. You step back quickly, swearing never to touch it again. But the image lingers in your mind, as though the wall reflected not what you are, but what you could become. Lore masters still debate whether humans exposed to tomb expansion are altered in subtle ways. Some records describe entire survivor groups losing memories, speaking in unison, or vanishing into the structures themselves. Others dismiss such tales as hysteria. You suspect both are true. The world itself is not just changing round you, it is pressing into you. One quirky detail the Mechanica sometimes whispers: Necron tombs are self-replicating. Every spire, every tower, every monolith is also a factory, producing more of itself. The expansion never stops. A world is not conquered. It is rewritten. You look across the horizon and see the truth. The hills are gone, replaced by terraces of black stone. The forests are stripped, their trunks lying in perfect rows like offerings. The rivers glow faintly green, their waters carrying currents that pulse in rhythm with the towers. Your world is no longer a world. It is a tomb, and you, still breathing, are already buried within it. Faith becomes the last weapon. With the city consumed and the land reshaped, the ecclesiarchy gathers survivors. Wherever shadows do not yet fall, priests carry battered relics, icons scorched by Gauss fire, books with half their pages missing. They raise these high and demand voices rise louder than fear. You stand among the crowd, listening to hymns echo through gutted streets. Lore masters still debate whether Necrons feel the warp at all. Some argue they are immune, and touched by demonic whispers, their soulless forms denying corruption. Others claim they recoil from true faith, their silence cracking when hymns ring loud. Watching them march past singing congregations, you cannot tell. Sometimes they ignore the voices, sometimes they stop, turn, and erase every singer in a single volley. Historians still argue whether martyrdom slowed the Necron tide. There are stories of priests standing in doorways, refusing to move, and immortals halting briefly, almost as if confused. There are also stories of whole cathedrals chanting until they were vaporized. The difference between miracle and annihilation often comes down to who survived to write the record. One quirky fact: a minor sect on distant shrine worlds teaches that Necrons are proof of the Emperor's prophecy soulless. Whispers, here, among the ruins. It becomes louder. You march with one such group. The priest at the front, robes torn, voice cracked, leads a chant that shakes with defiance. Families follow. Carrying nothing but candles, the hymn grows until the streets echo like they once did with laughter. For a moment, the silence breaks. Then green light answers. Immortals turn the corner. Weapons glowing, the priest raises his relic higher, shouting the Emperor's name. The crowd does not scatter. You brace yourself. Half expecting miracle, the beams cut through instantly. Reducing voices touch mid-note. Candles fall to the ground. Their flames snuffed. The hymn ends. You are the only one still breathing because you stood in shadow. One step behind the line. Lore masters still debate whether miracles exist in times like these. Some chronicles tell of Necron weapons faltering in the presence of relics. Others dismiss such tales as delusion. You know this. Your faith wavers not because miracles fail, but because silence is louder. Yet still. Some refuse to abandon belief. Priests continue to march, sermons echoing off black stone. Survivors huddle. Round them, too afraid to be alone. Children repeat verses by rote, their voices trembling, even as every attempt ends in silence. New processions form. Faith is all that remains, even if it cannot. When historians still argue whether these final chants mattered, some say they gave courage, buying precious hours of resistance. Others say they only drew Necrons faster. Like moths to flame, from where you stand. Both seem true. Every hymn ends in slaughter. Yet every hymn also keeps despair from consuming survivors fully. One night, you witness something stranger. A priest kneels before a rising pylon, chanting prayers into the dark. The Necrons sound him, but do not fire. They watch, silent, unmoving, as his hymn continues for hours. At dawn, the priest collapses from exhaustion. Only then do the Necrons erase him. You wonder if they listened or if they were simply waiting. One quirky note buried in Mechanicus records. Some scholars suggested Necrons view faith not a threat, but as curiosity, a phenomenon beyond their soulless comprehension. Perhaps they study it. Perhaps they simply let it echo because silence alone grows dull. The idea unsettles you more than there. Weapons dot in the ruins. Faith flickers like a candle. Sometimes it burns brighter, defiant against the void. Sometimes it gutters out with a hiss. You see it both ways, again and again, and every time. You wonder, do the Necrons even notice? Lore masters still debate whether the Emperor's light truly reaches such tombs. Priests insist it does. Even in death, survivors whisper otherwise, pointing at the silence that swallows every hymn. For you, caught in the middle, the question is not whether the Emperor hears. The question is whether he chooses to answer. The last stand takes, shaped not by command, but by gravity. Survivors drift toward the ruins of the capital, as if drawn together by instinct, families dragging carts, guardsmen clutching lascans with cracked power cells, priests hauling icons. Even adepts with data slates, they all converge on the same broken plaza. Perhaps they believe reinforcements will land here. Perhaps they simply want to die where the city once lived. Lore masters still debate whether last stands are strategy or ritual. Military tacticians describe them as doomed concentrations of force, inefficient and predictable. Yet human history clings. To them Thermopylae, Hell's Reach, countless worlds lost but remembered. To you, standing in the plaza as barricades rise from shattered hab walls, it feels less like strategy and more like inevitability. Historians still argue whether reinforcements were ever truly promised. Some survivors swear astropathic messages reached Segmentum Command. Others insist no signal ever left orbit. That silence was absolute from the first tremor. Either way, you hear the rumors. A fleet is coming. Just one more night. One more hour. Hold the line. You cling to it. though you know it is a lie. The barricades are laughable, furniture stacked against pylons, sandbags filled with ash, promethium drums rigged to burn once. Children carry stones to the walls while priests smear blood across. The gaps, the adepts set up their scavenged arcs of metal, swearing they will hold. The guardsmen check their rifles. Though most power cells glow faint, everyone whispers the same thing. The Astartes will come. Then the horizon glows green. Immortals march in rows, more than you can count, their eyes burning brighter than torches. Behind them drift monoliths, black slabs gliding. Above the ground, their faces etched with glyphs, the Necron Lord rises at their center, staff raised, its gaze fixed on the plaza. The hum of its power shakes your teeth. One quirky fact. Imperial Strategos manuals describe Necron monoliths as mobile fortresses. The description is inadequate. Watching them hover forward, each one taller than a spire, you realize they are not fortresses, they are tombs carried on air. Each one a fragment of the world beneath now brought to the surface. The first volley erases the barricades. Green beams slice through sandbags, walls, and flesh alike. Men and women vanish mid-scream, their weapons clattering to the stone. Firebombs burst but do nothing. The adepts' weapons spark once, then overload. Their wield is burning alive in. Their robes still. Survivors fight. Still. Luskan's flash. Bullets crack. Knives stab. The plaza echoes with every sound humans can make. Lore masters still debate whether such defiance has meaning. From a tactical view, it does not. The Necrons advance without pause, each death inevitable. But in the rhythm of rifles, the shouts of orders, the last chants of priests, you feel something. Stubborn. Not hope stubbornness. Humanity refuses to leave the stage silently. Historians still argue whether orbital reinforcements truly never came or whether they arrived too late. Finding only silence. Some accounts mention ships glimpsed in the sky, their signals cut before landing. Others insist the Imperium simply never bothered. Watching the stars above, you see nothing. No thrusters, no contrails, no promise. Only cold pinpricks of light. Indifferent to the slaughter below, the Necrons close the circle. Streets collapse inward, cutting off escape. The plaza fills. With fire and ash, priests scream louder than the guns, their voices cracking. Families clutch one another as shadows fall. You fire your rifle until the cell clicks empty, then throw it aside and pick up another. Each shot feels hollow, but you fire anyway. One guardsman beside you laughs as he fights, a broken sound. He shouts that he will carve his name into history, that someone will remember him. A beam cuts him down mid-laugh, leaving only dust. No name remains. Lore masters still debate whether martyrdom holds value without witness. If no one survives to remember, does sacrifice matter? In the plaza, surrounded by green light, the question feels cruel. Yet you keep fighting. Everyone does. Because stopping feels worse, the Necron Lord raises its staff one. Final time. The ground splits. The plaza crumbles. Monoliths loom above, casting shadows that swallow everything. You fall among the ruins, hearing only the silence that follows, the last standers. Overdot when silence settles. It feels heavier than any bombardment. The last shots fade. The hymns vanish, and even the hum of machinery quiets. You lie among the rubble. Lance burning is ringing. Around you, the plaza is empty. No guardsmen, no priests, no adepts, only dust, scattered weapons, and black stone rising where homes once stood. Lore masters still debate whether Necrons exterminate entirely or deliberately leave fragments behind. Some records describe tomb worlds where not a single human voice remains. Others tell of scavenger bands, ragged survivors clinging to the edges of reshaped lands. Looking at your own trembling hands, you realize you may be one of those fragments. Historians still argue whether survival in such places is curse or miracle. Entire populations erased. Yet a few individuals slip through the cracks hidden in ruins, buried in tunnels, overlooked by machines that no longer see them a threat. Some call them the blessed. Others call them forgotten. As you crawl through the ruins, you suspect both. You wander streets no longer streets. Towers of black metal loom where hablocks stood. Rivers run green, pulsing with energy that makes your skin itch. The sky above is no longer yours. Orbital void ships hang silent, some drifting lifeless, others swallowed by monoliths that pierce the clouds. Escape is gone. The planet itself has been claimed. One quirky fact: Imperial cartographers rarely mark these worlds as lost. Instead, they vanish from records, as if they never existed. Administratum files are purged, tides reallocated, star maps redrawn. It is easier to forget a tomb than to admit defeat. You wonder if your world will suffer the same erasure, written out of history before the ash of its last. Defenders has cooled. The Necron Lord no longer walks the streets. Its presence fades into the horizon, leading the legions deeper into the world's crust. Perhaps it moves to awaken more tombs. Perhaps this city is already beneath its notice. You are not sure which is worse, being hunted or being ignored. Lore masters still debate whether Necrons consume worlds fully or move on once there. Structures rise. Some believe they only seek to restore their dynasties, leaving husks behind. Others insist they strip every planet to bone. From your hidden vantage, you cannot tell. You only know the march has shifted elsewhere, and the silence in your city grows thicker. Days blur. You scavenge food where you can. Drink water that tastes of metal. Sleep in ruins that echo with mechanical hums. Sometimes you hear other survivors, their footsteps cautious, their whispers brief. No one lingers long. Trust is as broken as the streets. Each person moves alone, hoping solitude buys more days. Historians still argue whether survivors of such awakenings ever rejoin the Imperium. Some are rescued years later by patrol fleets. Others are declared heretics, tainted by contact. Many are never found, their bones buried beneath alien stone. You suspect your own fate lies in the last category. The world is no longer human. Every sunrise reveals more pylons, more towers, more black lines etched into the land. The air tastes sharper, thinner. The stars seem farther away. Even time feels uncertain, days too short, nights too long. It is as if reality itself bends to match the Necron design. And then the silence deepens, the footsteps fade. The immortals march away, leaving only static whispers behind. You realize the Necrons are finished here. The world is theirs, and they no longer need to notice you. You are left in the shadow of Blackstone, your breath loud in the silence. Perhaps you will die tomorrow. Perhaps you will endure for. Gauss fire fade. The hymns fall silent. The towers rise higher. You close your eyes and feel the weight of the tomb pressing down. Endless and eternal. Now the pace slows, as though the story itself exhales. The streets are gone. The voices erased. And what remains is not struggle but stillness. Imagine the ruins under starlight. The black towers humming faintly. Their glow steady as a heartbeat. The air is cool, the wind absent. The night endless. Your breath is shallow, yet it carries louder here, where nothing else dares to stir. A broken wall becomes your shelter. The dust under your hand is all that is left of those who fought beside you. Their names do not echo in the void, but you remember them quietly, as if memory itself is a prayer. Time stretches. Hours lengthen into something unmeasured. Perhaps days pass, or perhaps only moments. The Necrons do not care. They do not mark us. They do not watch the skies. They build. They hum. They rise. The world bends to their pattern, and reality follows, obedient as stone. You sit within that pattern, a fragment of resistance that no longer matters, and yet still breathing. Your heartbeat is the last rebellion. Your thoughts the last defiance. Even in silence, you remain human, and that is enough. So let the towers rise. Let the shadows lengthen. Let the stars remain indifferent. You are here. You see, you endure, and in the quiet rhythm of your breath, there is something the tomb cannot erase. And so, we end in stillness. No armies march. No hymns ring. No guns fire. Only the hush of a world remade, and a listener carried gently into silence.